Mr. Jaitley, first of all, thank you very much. And as you can see, it's a packed house on a Saturday morning, and people want to hear you speak, and people want to hear you speak openly. They want to hear you speak frankly, sir. I don't know what the nation wants to know. This audience certainly wants to know something, otherwise they wouldn't be here this morning. So thank you very much, Mr. Jaitley. And we see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. They're all eager to hear your views on different subjects. I think what I'll begin by saying is that I give you, Mr. Jaitley, a choice. We have two areas. I rarely do that in the course of any interview that I've done so far. But we'll extend you the choice of choosing between politics and economics. There are two areas. If you ask me, I'd go with the politics. But if you ask this audience, they'd start with the economics and go with the politics. It's not optional, Mr. Jaitley. You have to answer questions on both. Which one do you choose?
I think the two are absolutely interrelated. And when the nation wants to know, you really don't have a choice on what you want to say.
Okay, you deflected that. Let's go with the economic questions, Mr. Jaitley. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was here, said a few things that I think we need understanding of what the Prime Minister's real message was. But my first question to you, just to open up the conversation, is this, that you'll be presenting the budget about a month from now. And everyone's been saying this. They've seen this strap-on channels. You may have heard it in Davos, that if India's time is there, India's time is now. So if India's time is now, we can't afford to let economics come in the way, Mr. Jaitley. I know there are targets of fiscal deficit, 3.6, 3.9, 4.1, and you know some people won't even be happy with 3. Why don't you just open things up? Why have a very hardcore target on the fiscal deficit? People would say if India's time is now, open up, spend. Open up the coffers, put 50 to 100,000 crores more into the system so that the economy gets in motion. That's a bet that you could be taking now, Mr. Jaitley. Why don't you take that bet? Will you take that bet or will you be cautious?
I think you'll have to wait a couple of weeks to know the answer to that.
You can.
But I can tell you, I've been consulting all shades of opinion. And when I say all shades of opinion, it's not only people in government or people in industry, economists. And this is the first time I've come across people holding sharply divided views. And each one has a strong argument in his favor. There's, of course, an argument being given that in the current economic situation, public investment holds the key.
That's right.
Of course, we've been fortunate to get a lot more of the foreign direct investment also, and there is some improved urban demand. But then realizing the importance of public investment, you should go all out. And therefore, you should not feel constrained by what targets you've set for yourself in the past.
Precisely.
The situation is very fast moving.
Yeah.
And therefore, in relation to what's happening, you must spend more so that you can grow more. Then there is another argument. And the alternate argument is what's also equally important is credibility of governance. 1 year you deviated from the target, will you do it again? And particularly if the oil prices are 1/3 of what they were, if you still can't meet the deficit target, when will you do that? And therefore, both arguments have a weight. There's a third argument also being given.
Right.
And the third argument being given is, should you at all have these targets which constrain you, because in a fast-moving situation, governments must be free to decide, they have the mandate to decide. And therefore, the whole idea of tightening yourself around a particular target, is it fair? Now, very responsible people have given these three sets of arguments. And of course, the government has the benefit of these views. Predominantly, industry is of the view you must spend more. The economist view is sharply divided. And I think having factored all the views, finally when we come out with the answer a few weeks from now, and that will also depend on the kind of resource we have, the kind of growth potential that we have, the kind of tax buoyancy for next year that we anticipate. I think all these inputs will go into determining the policy of the government.
But you know, Mr. Jaitley, finance ministers like television channel heads also look for the ratings. And I'm sure that you would also be driven by some thought about what the ratings of the budget this time will be. And some people feel that when you meet your fiscal deficit target, the economists and the ones who write give you a 9 on 10. Will you be guided by that? At least give us some indication. You've given us all the three options, but you haven't weighed in on where you stand on it.
No, that's exactly, you see, you'll have to wait. As I said, you normally don't talk about this, the finer specifics
it's not February yet.
On the eve of the budget. But the fact is that all these inputs are available. Now, as far as the ratings are concerned, I think what's more important is that Indian economy has to be put on a sounder platform. Don't forget, India is one of the few economies in the world which survived 2001, which survived 2008, which survived 2015. And therefore, our own fundamentals have to be strong enough. And therefore, any budget really has to weigh the areas of weakness where investments are required, and therefore has to pitch in that direction. Now, if a budget for the cause of ratings goes in for sheer populism, it's not necessarily the cause of economics or even sounder politics that you are eventually fulfilling.
Mr. Jaitley, yesterday the Prime Minister spoke at this event, and I think you've seen the quote which has been put out in all the newspapers, the conversation about incentives and subsidies. I saw some people, the Prime Minister said that when you give tax breaks to the corporate sector, they're called incentives. And when you give similar, choices for fertilizers, I think he spoke in the context of fertilizers, he said they call it subsidies, and he referred to the fact that they reveal a mindset. And when the Prime Minister was saying that, when we heard the speech, there were some people in the audience who were applauding, but I thought that was a very nervous kind of applause. With the people who want to know, what does that mean? That has been a subject of interpretation in many newspapers this morning. What really does it mean? I mean, it's been a hard year
I think the Prime Minister had a valid point.
Right.
And the valid point is that at the end of the day, the government is not against the concept per se of subsidies. In a country where you have more than 25% of the people below the poverty line, you have to make sure that a very large section of the population is entitled to cheap food. You have to make sure that the farm sector, which is stressed, will have to be supported. And if you look at the whole structure of the Indian economy, it's the agricultural sector, particularly in the last 2 years when you've had a poorer monsoon, which has been stressed, and therefore you'll need to put funds into that particular sector. And therefore, there would be targeted subsidies. If I heard him right on the channels itself, the Prime Minister was saying that we are for rationalization, not for abolition. And I think that's a correct statement. That's an unexceptional statement for the reason that they must be targeted to the people who are entitled to them. Subsidies are not meant for wealthier people, they are certainly meant for the weaker section.
Yeah, it's the second part which what people need a little bit more elaboration,
and
Mr. Jaitley.
Therefore,
yes.
I think he was correcting the imbalance in the discourse.
Yes.
And the imbalance in the discourse comes that when you speak in terms of rationalization of subsidies, you speak in terms of almost abolition of the subsidies. How you can cut down the bill itself. He said, therefore, there are segments which are entitled to it, and therefore these will be target. You don't use the same argument when it is used in the context of giving some kind of tax breaks to other sections of the economy.
No, it would be interpreted, I mean, let me put it very generally to you now. One interpretation is, and maybe I'm being too cynical about it, but one interpretation would be that the corporates have got what they needed to get. There have been enough tax breaks. Now you know we are going through a difficult investment cycle. You've had it very good for a very long time. Don't expect anything more. Is that the message, or do you think that's an overinterpretation?
I think the reality is that India needs a strong, powerful corporate sector. India equally needs a very strong, powerful agricultural sector. After all, you have 55% of the people dependent on agriculture. And it's not merely that agriculture adds to growth. The spiral effect of the purchasing power of that 55% is also dependent on it. And therefore, I think you need a sound policy which helps both the sectors. I don't think you can put the two sectors in conflict with each other.
Okay.
Today, with a very large population, when you need employment generation, which in turn helps a large number of poorer people, you need to make sure that every segment of the economy grows.
Sure, sure. So it's not this versus that. Mr. Jaitley, you come back from Davos, and I think everyone says that India is doing very well. When you go to Davos, when you come to India, then there is a sense of greater despondency, it was referred to. Maybe it's because we expect too much of ourselves, which is a good thing. But the other way of looking at it is that we are basically a shining star in an ocean of darkness. That's not a good position to be in, is it? I mean, we can say that on relative terms we are doing well, but then the question will always become of whether we are doing enough, and a sense of complacency setting in. Would you agree that that's a worry also internally for us? Some people say we should be growing at 9 to 10% for 3 to 4 years and not be satisfied with the figures being put out now, which
I myself,
of 7% plus.
I myself have a mixed feeling.
Yes.
Depending on where I am and who I am speaking to. When we look at the international scenario, India obviously stands out. If you look at what's happening across economies in the world, there are not too many economies which are doing well at the moment. You have economies like Russia, Brazil, which are in the minus range. You have others who are in the marginal plus range. You have patchy growths, as is evident from the fourth quarter results in the US. Now, having said this, if suddenly you have an economy which is growing at 7.5%, it obviously stands out internationally. Yes. And therefore, when India is referred to world over as the bright spot or the sweet spot,
right,
or the fastest growing large economy in the world, I think we feel happy, we feel proud of the fact. Having said that, we have our own shares of sleepless nights.
What gives you sleepless nights?
I'll tell you what gives us sleepless nights. Because I think in the question you gave partly the answer. I am convinced, and as are most others, that we probably have a potential to have a growth which is higher than what we've achieved. This 7.5% is not our optimum rate. The Indian normal has to be in the 8 or 9% category. And it's only then, if you grow at that pace, that you can get rid of poverty, you can have faster growth rates in India. Now look at the way China grew. For almost 3 decades, they came close to a double-digit figure, 9% plus. That's the average that they grew on. It's only then that the size of their economy expanded. And obviously, nobody expected China to grow at 10% indefinitely.
Yes.
So if China slows down a little, it was only to be expected.
Yes.
But our opportunity has come now, and there are more than one factors which support us. We have a huge human resource, a trained human minds. We have a very large market. We have a large domestic purchasing power. We have a service sector economy which has in the past always touched somewhere close to a double digit. We have a potential for improving on our manufacturing. We have innovative skills. Our labor cost and wage costs are not rising as are rising in China. We are not a part of the factors which are the transition which is taking place in China. They are going through their own transition from manufacturing to services, from exports to domestic consumption. Their slowdown doesn't impact on us. Economies world over are doing badly because of oil commodity prices. Now that's a situation which suits us because we are net buyers of this. And therefore, given these advantages, what is it that we have to really do to put our house in order?
Right.
I think the first important thing is we carry on the structural reforms that we put in place. We concentrate on infrastructure. We concentrate on irrigation. We concentrate on improving on our agricultural productivity, improving our manufacturing sectors. And at the end of the day, what is it that you are asking for to get that cutting edge? That you must grow at a rate which is 1.5% faster than what you are growing today.
True.
And I think with all these changes, and hopefully in future, rain gods being kinder to us than they have been in the last 2 years, it's not a very difficult or an impossible target for India to achieve. So we all know that our potential is right there in front of us. And therefore, we have that potential.
Yes, I'm sure you do, but you must also concede, Mr. Finance Minister, that you are running on very, very strong tailwinds. I mean, people are saying fuel prices are going to stay this way for 3 to 4 years. If you aggregate the numbers that you are gaining and put it in terms of cash flow, that means that in the years of the Modi government, till 2019, you would, from now till then, have over $200+ billion in your kitty, if you look at it in terms of pure cash flow, the money that you're saving because of the fuel prices. Now, that is not what Mr. Manmohan Singh was, the situation that he faced in the years of UPA 2. And hence, the comparison to previous years and now is not always a correct comparison.
No, I'm not on the comparison.
My point to you.
After all, let us not put it into partisan issues.
No, not at all.
There may be situations where even without taking growth measures, reform measures, you can grow by 8 to 9%.
True.
Merely because the global tailwinds are on your side. It did happen during the UPA government. But I'm not on those comparisons. The fact is, today's global situation is such that it can put us in a position where we have a potential to grow, and we may probably be the only economy in the world growing at that pace.
I agree.
In the first instance, you get noticed. Then people are apprehensive. Do you have the appetite to continue with these reforms, or you don't have the appetite? And if we do demonstrate that appetite, and then investment flows increase into the country.
I don't want to be pessimistic this Saturday morning, Mr. Jaitley, but I just want to put a few tough figures to you and then get your sense of it. If you don't mind, can I go a little specific right now? I'm not an economist. I'm a layman here. I've just got a few simple questions for you. Now, Mr. Jaitley, exports have been falling for 13 months in a row now. In December 2015, they shrank 15% to 22 billion. You are saying that you're going to create an ecosystem to boost our exports, but you also have the devaluation of the yuan that's going to put further pressure on our exports. Can you tell us how you're going to look at that in the wake of the mitigating circumstances you faced?
I don't think you can read much out of that figure. For the simple reason, you have a situation where the global trade itself has shrunk. And if global trade has shrunk, everybody's share in that global trade is going to shrink. Secondly, a lot of this shrinkage is on account of lower values, partly lower volumes. But if, for instance, the oil prices come down, then 18% of India's export basket is refined oil. Obviously, the exports will shrink because the values have shrunk. And therefore, in value shrinking itself, exports will shrink. I think the current global situation, this is an adverse fallout which is taking place across the world. We are a part of that.
Sure. No, I only meant it in terms of that you're going to have to compete harder with China. The rupee is also in free fall mode, Mr. Jaitley. You know, it's fallen by 3.
I don't think you can use the word free fall as far as the rupee is concerned.
How would you describe it?
I'll tell you the reason. Till August, except the Swiss franc, rupee was the only currency world over which kept pace with the dollar, because the dollar was hardening. It's only when the Chinese devaluation took place in August last year that the rupee started shaking. And if you do a comparison of all global currencies vis-a-vis the dollar, which have weakened in the last couple of months, in fact, rupee has weakened the least amongst most of them. Currencies as in Brazil, Russia have weakened hugely. Other countries have also weakened. And against most other currencies, rupee hasn't weakened. And therefore, to use the word free fall as far as the rupee is concerned would not be a fair.
That's semantic. So you're saying that the rupee, it's about because of international cues. It's not because of the real value of the rupee being lower.
You see, rupee is, will eventually find its own value in the international market. It will depend on the strength of our economy and what is our ability to attract dollars into the economy.
Right. Mr. Jaitley, a big issue that people face is corruption. You know, corruption is the biggest scourge in this country. And I've seen recent figures, and we can congratulate ourselves, and I think you've done a good job quite clearly in the last 18 months that we've gone from, I think 85 to 76 in terms of where we stand in the Transparency International Index. But if you ask this audience today, Mr. Jaitley, corruption is still the biggest scourge. You've done a great job, direct tax, direct transfers, you've had a transparent bidding process. It's fantastic. But the trouble that people face, the local police inspector, the local excise inspector, some government official who needs to give clearances and approvals, deep down, the one question that people would want to ask you is, do you need a more comprehensive, stringent kind of policy to tackle corruption?
I thought when you mentioned corruption, you were about to compliment us.
No,
because if there is one significant change which has taken place in the last 1.5 years in India, it's in this field. Now, let me just tell you, does anybody talk in New Delhi about political corruption? Does anybody speak in terms of files pending for months and months together for collateral reasons? Are FIPB and environment, which are the two important clearances in Delhi, in a single case being held up for the reasons they were held up in the past? Nobody even whispers these. Also, mind you, institutional mechanisms are now being created where discretions are eliminated. Now, almost each one of the largest by the state, be it mineral, be it coal, be it iron ore, be it spectrum, today the rule is auction. You don't even have, the personal interaction with the government has been completely eliminated. You can sit in your office and just bid as far as your laptop is concerned.
Right.
Now let me tell you, aware of what happens at the ground level and so on, we've been trying our level best. For instance, even in the departments which had a very bad name like taxation departments.
Sure.
Today we are trying to move to a system where you file your returns online. Your queries will be online, your assessment orders will be online, and your refunds will be online. We have almost, last year for example, 1.34 crore people got their refunds online. And therefore there's nobody who comes to you and then asks for a kickback. Now those kind of systems are slowly being introduced as far as the government is concerned. Of course, at the lower level you'll still have black sheep. And therefore, you'll have to go hard as far as those systems are concerned.
Can you get them online as well?
I can probably make sure that with a vigilant media, they'll be on screen.
Great. Great. So, Mr. Jaitley, ask everyone, and I think you're batting very well, Mr. Jaitley. I'm trying to find out what you call this style of batting. It's a mix between Sehwag and Gavaskar. Mr. Jaitley, the big concern is jobs. One of the biggest challenges that your government faces and your main objectives of this government is job creation and it is skill generation. You have set yourself a target in this respect, but my question pertains to workers who are skilled and unemployed. The biggest concern is when you are generating skills on a daily basis in this country. And I was looking, according to the Labour Bureau, the rate of unemployment among those who got formal training from the industrial training institutes of skill centers is a worrying 14.5%. That's a huge number of skilled unemployed. I appreciate, and you're saying I'm not complimenting you enough. There is always a compliment, and then there's a question which follows, Mr. Jaitley. I appreciate your commitment to skill development. But what about the crores of skilled unemployed who are also coming out into our system? It can lead to other issues.
I think if you closely followed what the Prime Minister said yesterday, between the lines, as I understood this thing, the answer to your question lay there. Obviously, governments have a limited capacity to create jobs. Governments having a limited capacity to create jobs, even private sector, when I speak in terms of structured private sector, will have its own limitations.
Sure.
Even if you expand in your manufacturing by 8 or 9%, there'll be a limit to the level of jobs that they can create. And therefore, having realized this, the emphasis of the government in the last 1.5 years has been, A, what you mentioned, to skill people. B, as economy expands, they'll get jobs. If you have more cities, for instance, being created, you'll probably have more jobs. These are centers of economic activity. At the same time, you'll also have to strengthen your SMEs, your informal sectors. And therefore, in each one of this, what does the Mudra scheme aim at? Crores of people in this country will now get small loans from the banks. No security to be given, moderate interest rates. Otherwise, they were going to money lenders at 25 and 30%. And set up their own shops, set up their own establishments, set up their own some small workshop. And I must say, over the last few months, these have been runaway successful schemes. You have what is, at the end of the day, Startup India. What is Stand Up India? You are looking at women entrepreneurs, SC and ST entrepreneurs. In startup, you are looking for technology-oriented entrepreneurs, giving them tax breaks, giving them a funding mechanism. So this whole emphasis of funding these unfunded sections of society, that besides the structured employment coming from private sector and the state sector, you'll have to generate a huge amount of economic activity at the ground level, that people are in a position to employ themselves and probably create a job or two.
Mr. Jaitley, why do you think the markets hit 24,000 in January 7th this year? Is it a consequence of global factors alone, or is it because the euphoria and high expectations when you came to power have ebbed down a bit? How do you read it?
I think the slowdown in the global economy, just as the oil prices favored us, there's an adverse side. The first adverse side is what you mentioned, the shrinkage of the global trade and the exports. The second is that the global markets have all been very choppy. The global economy is integrated, and any development in any part of the world is going to impact on markets. It may also impact on currencies. And therefore, if something happens in Greece, or something happens in Europe, or the interest rates go up in the United States, or there is a weakening of currencies or a slowdown in China, this is going to have ripples across the global market. And it is these factors, so impact on markets, impact on currencies, has certainly not been because of domestic economic factors.
Right. Mr. Jaitley, when you said in January 2015 that retrospective tax is a closed chapter, won't be opened up again, then that was great, because you were promising a stable, predictable and a competitive tax regime which you're working for. But there have been some times you get a feeling there's a disconnect between the intent and the action on the ground. Case in point is the MAT imbroglio on FIIs. My question to you is, what steps will you take to ensure that the tax department does not exceed its mandate and aligns itself to the government's vision of the taxation system?
See, at the end of the day, the tax department has a clear mandate. And the clear mandate is that taxes which are payable, they must collect. And if they take steps to collect taxes which are payable, I don't think it's any form of an excess. At the end of the day, the nations which you represent also run on taxes.
You do as well, Mr. Jaitley.
And they run on taxes, and the government must have legitimate taxes. Right. But at the same time, there must be no unfair taxation. In fact, this government has been candid enough to say from day one, and I've repeated this repeatedly, that whenever there is an unfair assessment order, it doesn't bring you revenue, it brings you a bad name. Because ultimately we are a rule of law society. Some court or tribunal intervenes, stays that tax. And in all those controversial assessments which were passed during the last government, or in a carry forward of what the steps the last government took, Not 1 rupee till date has come into the coffers of the government. So the retrospective taxation brought us a bad name. It became a defining moment against India. It didn't bring us tax.
Right.
A large number of those transfer pricing cases,
Yes.
many of them didn't bring us any tax, but they brought us a bad name.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with this situation? Because this was a real mess on the table when the new government came over. So we promised we won't have any retrospective taxation. We haven't had it.
Yeah.
We promised that no new notices will be sent
Yes.
in those old legislations, and we stood by that. Now, a number of issues as an after effect of what had been done previously came up. We allowed courts to settle those disputes. Courts inevitably decided against the government because they found these were unfair demands. We had the best of legal consultations, took the matters to the cabinet and decided not to agitate those matters further, put a quietus to it. As a spiral effect of that, dozens of cases are now getting settled. Secondly, even when those issues of MAT, etc. came up, we resorted to other instruments, appointing an expert committee under the chairmanship of the chairman of the Law Commission, or even asking some eminent judge to mediate a taxation dispute. Now, we've been trying to put each one of those issues at rest. And today, as the two of us speak, 18 or 19 months after this government has taken over, there are about 2 or 3 of those issues left. Personally, I would like to see them being sorted out as expeditiously as possible.
That's great.
Either through a tribunal or a judicial process. And whatever way the courts will decide, we'll accept it. Please remember one fact. Governments have no power to set aside an assessment order. It can only be set aside by a judicial proceeding.
Yes.
And therefore, there will have to be a due process which is carried out. And only then, if the assessee is able to establish that this is an unfair order, we'll accept that verdict.
Now, you know, I've been given this chit some 5 minutes back, and there's a time limit on this. So I'll tell you what the nation really wants to know. No, I won't tell you, I'll ask you. You see, there was an at-home at the Rashtrapati Bhavan a few days back, and we have several informers around who's trying to find out who's talking to whom. You were talking to Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. And there were all cameras trained in that direction, Mr. Jaitley, trying to figure out, and if we had some kind of radio frequency which could spy in on the conversation, we would have. So what the nation wants to know, Mr. Jaitley, is whether that conversation was about GST. And if it was not, then why not? No, Mr. Jaitley, now Mr. I've been very patient for the last half an hour. And my patience is running out. So you need to get to this question very quickly.
Let me tell you, these are informal occasions, and it's not necessary that you get into any political discussion at these forums. I certainly didn't have any political discussion with her. It's a different matter with many colleagues in the Congress party. I have been discussing GST in the past, but certainly this was not one of the subjects I discussed.
So how frustrating has it been to not have the GST bill passed this year? This was meant to be, Mr. Jaitley, one of the headline reforms to materialize of this government. Will the GST bill pass in the upcoming session?
Actually, it was
how delayed is the rollout going to be?
It was an important reform of the UPA government.
Sure.
So if I have to credit the authorship of the bill, I have to credit it to them.
Yes.
Now, if the author turns against his own script,
yes,
how do I make him see reason?
No, but you've reached out. Are they seeing reason?
I have reached out, I have spoken to them, I have visited them, I have explained to them. And I think, I hope they'll see reason.
Did you reach out too late?
I don't think that's factually correct, because session after session we've been speaking to them. Initially, when the bill was introduced, they said, not this session, the next session. And then suddenly, after 2 or 3 sessions, those 3 new objections came.
Yes. On the specific.
I even have had a discussion with the colleagues in the Congress party on each of those 3.
Sure.
Ones, and I hope they are flexible and see the rationale behind passing the GST.
Yeah.
After all, each one of them goes against the grain of what they themselves had drafted.
You know what I'm saying, and this I want to conclude with this, Mr. Jaitley, that the fact is that, ahead of every session, people want to see consensus emerge. I'm sure that you want to see consensus emerge, and nobody wants a situation of distress where the opposition, however small, blocks what is happening in Parliament. We've spoken about it. On my show, you've spoken about it. The frustration that you experience. But how long will this continue?
You must keep one fact in mind. Every political party except the Congress is actively supporting it, including the UP allies.
Sure.
So even the RJD, the NCP, the JDU, they've said that they are openly supporting this bill. Each one of them has made statements. So there is not a single political party who goes with them. Every state, because this impacts on revenues of the states, including the Congress states, are actively supporting this legislation. Now, having said this, and then having said that, I credit them with the authorship, because ultimately it is Mr. Chidambaram who in 2006 in the budget announced that they will start working on this and created the Empowered Committee. Mr. Mukherjee introduced the bill in 2011. Now, having done all this, I don't see any reason why they should have a rethink on the bill at all. But if there is a discussion over one particular idea in the bill, etc., I am certainly willing to discuss with them. But anything which makes it a flawed legislation, certainly we can't bind future generations with a flawed legislation.
So there's been no movement. It's still where it was.
No, we've been discussing with a large number of them, and as the parliament session comes, we also discuss. And don't forget one factor, that at the end of the day, it's very good to have laws passed by consensus, and a law like this, which impacts on the taxation structure of India, being passed by concession, that would be a preference. Otherwise, it can be put to vote.
From the point of view of the economy and business, and last question on this one, now we keep hearing it used to be Congress versus all, now it's BJP versus all. Is BJP versus all a good situation from the country's economic point of view? We've seen this political polarization.
I think on all economic legislations, it has never been BJP versus all. In fact, this government has been so gracious with the states that every regional party which may be supporting us or may not be supporting us has normally supported all our legislations in Parliament. So when the mining law was passed, when the coal auction law was passed, when the GST is being discussed, from the BSP to the Samajwadi to the Trinamool to the AIDMK to Biju Janata Dal to the JDU, every political party, NCP, has been supporting us, because we've been gracious in sharing that revenue or the proceeds of all this with the states. So there is not a single regional party which has been against us. So even in the coal mine law, the mining law and the GST law, Congress stands alone without even its allies.
Okay. So, Mr. Jaitley, I thank you all very much for your time. You've taken the questions very well. We've had a great conversation. And I think you've been fairly candid this morning. It's not, I was wanting to tell you that it's not February yet. Maybe you can reveal a little bit more. But I don't think I'll win that one. Thank you, Mr. Jaitley. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.